Hi everyone, I'm Andy Newell, Managing Director of Iris Connect, and I'd just like to thank Laura for that fascinating keynote. Now, we will be touching on a few of the themes that she raised over the course of this presentation as well. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself and the organisation. Iris Connect's been around for 17 years now, crikey, but we've been grinding away on the problem of teacher professional development that whole time. It's a challenging place to work. You know, you've got time constraints, we've got all these different factors that make it quite difficult to operate in this space. But alongside that, we've also been doing work in other industries as well. So we've worked with physicians, battlefield medics, we've worked in the space of counselling, therapy, you name it. So we've worked in lots of different areas. And one of the things that has been really apparent recently is that we can take the learning from a lot of these different spaces, namely that the nature of the professional development that tends to occur is sort of emergent from the pressures and the constraints and also the opportunities of those industries. And we can use that to reflect with new light on the work that's going on in education and start to take advantage of some of the emergent tools to really free up what I'd call a signature pedagogy of teaching. So why have we been working in this space for so long, and why do I care? Look, there's stats galore on this. You can go and look it up any way you want. I'm illustrating it here with some work by John Hattie. But what we do know is that teaching really matters. Teachers matter most. And I know that can be incredibly hard to prioritise within a busy school day when the urgent is always getting in the way of the important. But in terms of things, levers we can pull as school leaders, the most important thing is teacher quality and supporting teachers to be the best they can be every day. This is not only because an individual teacher has a significant impact on the life chances of young people, it's because those effects are cumulative over time. So a string, an unbroken chain of really effective teachers makes a huge difference. Now, the question is, how do we do that? How do we support, within all of these pressures and constraints, really effective professional learning for teachers? And just recently, well, in fact, to be fair, this is as old as time, this particular debate, but there is an emergent set of different ideas about how we can best support teachers to be the best they can be. On one hand, you've got the people like myself who believe firmly that teaching is inherently a process that can be developed through dialogue, through collaboration, through reflection on practice, and yes, the rehearsal of technique where it's necessary and appropriate. On the other hand, we have a very behaviouralist interpretation of teaching, this notion that we can habituate effective teaching behaviours through multiple rounds of rehearsal. Now, I'm setting that up as a very binary, of course. People on both sides of the debate value and recognise the work that each other are doing. But I think it's really important that we, especially at this moment, look at the two and really consider our way forward, because AI, whichever route we're going to go down, is going to be a catalyst, a tool that's going to accelerate and give new opportunities. So on one hand, you know, if we're looking at a behaviouralist interpretation of teaching, then we're looking at micro corrections from AI, giving us sort of instantaneous feedback to adjust and nudge our behaviour. And on the other hand, is AI able to surface interesting moments for us to discuss, for us to build our mental model of practice around? So that more behaviouralist interpretation is framed up really beautifully here by Paul Van Brixen-Toyo. So I'll just give you a moment or two to read what's on screen. So it's really interesting, isn't it? What we're seeing here is a clear statement that teaching is not improved through discussion. And more importantly, that it is improved by practicing doing well under supervision from an expert, and that supervised practice should be centred on the right things, a sort of defined set of best practices. And on the surface, why wouldn't we want teachers doing more of the right things? It makes sense. Now another long quote, apologies, but this one's from David Didow, and I'd like you to just have an opportunity to read this as well. So what is a missed opportunity in a classroom? Now, from my perspective, that is a failure to kind of notice something of importance, to interpret it well, and respond dynamically to that opportunity. And so when we are talking about a series of missed opportunities, we're talking about the teacher's mental model of practice or their situation model, not supporting them to attend to individual learning needs. And in fact, it is this noticing and responding that's been shown time again to be one of the most important factors when identifying teaching expertise. So that noticing and responding goes to the heart of a really important set of considerations around what kind of expertise we want to be developing for teachers. On one hand, you've got adaptive experts. These are people who tend to notice, interpret and respond in an environment, and a routine expert. And so these people tend to be able to implement something standardized but with great efficiency. And both of these types of expertise are real powerhouses in the right field. Adaptive experts also tend to have agency, greater situational awareness, a rich mental model, a rich picture of what it is they're trying to achieve and how they're going to go about doing it. And they balance habit with reflection. So they can be very efficient because they have the habits and the automaticity associated with key routines, but they have the ability to snap out of it, look at the situation in the round and make a decision on the fly. On the other hand, we have routine expertise, which tends to be associated with industries where it's relatively low agency, flipping burgers, for example. Those behaviours tend to be highly rehearsed, and the goal of that rehearsal is habitual implementation. And the habit is when we, a behaviour is triggered by the environment rather than our conscious intent. They tend to be ruthlessly efficient. It's a really powerful tool in the space of industries that best support this type of expertise. But the critical factor, the thing that really, really matters, is that routine experts are challenged by change. The moment some trigger or situation arises that has not been rehearsed for, they tend to fall back on trial and error. So when we think about the demands of the education system, I like to think of it in terms of, just as a teacher at the front, there are 30 of the most complicated objects that scientists know of in the universe, human minds, interacting with each other, with the teacher, and with the material in this complex process of learning. Now, to me, change is just part of the day job in education. So to me, it makes sense that we should be trying to support teachers to be adaptive experts in this context. So rather than doing the right things, we have to broaden our objectives here into doing the right things at the right time for the right reason. And so that is our rich mental models of practice, integrating with our situational awareness so we can spot opportunities so that we can identify challenges early. And so what's going on with an adaptive expert working in a classroom? Effectively, they're doing what Sean would describe as reflection in practice. So they're noticing something and they're going through a quick reflection on where they are, what they're trying to achieve, and how best to advance their goals. And reflection in practice is supported by reflection on practice, a slower, more deliberate process where we go through the what happened objectively, what do I see, what was the situation, so what were the implications of the things that happened, and then now narrowing into now what am I going to do differently moving forward in order to either take advantage of the opportunity I missed or to address the challenge. Now, reflecting like that can be easy in our day-to-day basis. If we go to a shop and we see a sandwich, we eat it, we don't like it, we can resolve not to go to that shop again. But in the classroom, or in fact any complex profession, it can be really hard. Feedback can be fuzzy and delayed, so we don't really know whether we've got it right or wrong in that moment. Equally, there's a lot of information to process. We might feel quite emotive about it. And so actually reflecting professionally is a skill. It's something that we can develop over time and improve on. And This is where we'll start touching on some of the other professions that we've worked with over the years and how they go about developing that skill of reflection. And interestingly, it's sort of inherently a dialogic process. So what you see on the screen here is the fact that we obviously, to be an expert, we need to understand the theory, but we also need to see a model, we also need to observe, and we also need to compare. Now with something physical, this is easy. I would understand the theory around asking questions in a certain way, see a teacher using them in that way, have that person or another expert observe me, and then we can sit and discuss the route forward. But with something like a mental model of practice or a reflective model of practice, how do we do that? Well, it's called surfacing. So what we can see is that when we're modelling, we want to see expert thinking in action. When we observe, we want, or when we are observed, we want the expert to be able to see the thinking behind the doing. So think of those two things as a worked example of thinking and showing my workings. And all of that can come together into this process of the crucible of professional judgment, which is this process of comparing, contrasting and discussing. And we see this routinely in industries where they really care about adaptive expertise. So let's consider physicians on their ward rounds. I don't know if anyone's ever had that excruciating experience where you've been in hospital and the ward rounds come along with the consultant, and then a gaggle of junior doctors have come with them, and the consultant will sort of, first of all, model what he's noticing in your chart, interpret it so that the junior doctors can see how he's thinking or how she's thinking, and then consider like what they're going to do next, how are they going to respond to this. And of course, then in the ward round, they flip that around the other way, and it would be the turn of a junior doctor with the next patient. So the expert gets to see the thinking underpinning the doing. Equally true in aviation, where the flight debrief is something where we'll go through that cycle explicitly of what happened, what were the consequences of it, and what should we do differently next time. Now, in that space, it's quite easy for them to do this because they have rich data and telemetry from the cockpit to help them to have a richer conversation, more informed by the facts. For us in education, surfacing mental models of practice, surfacing the thinking behind the doing, can be much harder. First of all, just think about that ward round concept when you're just teaching, and as you're teaching, you speak to your coach and explain why you're doing what you're doing. That's not going to work. You're going to have a very confused classroom. Historically, we really suffered through the feedback process and observation feedback process because our recollection of the lesson might be dim in the mind because we're meeting some time later. And obviously that whole process is enormously subjective, so it can be quite hard to get on the same page. So what can we do? What tools and technologies can we employ in order to be able to have those rich professional conversations that are informed by evidence? Well, obviously the best thing would be to go back in time and be able to sit there in your own lesson and talk to your coach and explain why you were doing what you were doing. We can't do that. But we do have the next best thing, and that would be video, so that we can record when we want to, we can reflect on that, and we can share that and use that as a touch point in our conversation. And actually, one of the things that's really, really important now is that AI is coming through to enable us to not have to spend an hour watching a lesson back, and it will flag up interesting moments that could be a useful point of conversation moving forwards. So the idea is that we can sit and watch the video together, and we can model what the expert is noticing and the decision-making process that they may have been going through in that circumstance. We can narrate our own practice, so I can explain to the coach why I did that, and then we can discuss and make refinements in context. So this is a very deep professional learning experience. It's something that's going to be fairly resource intensive, and it's something that is surfacing a lot of really important information. But the other thing we want from professional development, apart from being meaningful and deep and effective, is we want breadth. We want to reach every teacher in the school with enough of this kind of activity to really kickstart professional learning. And in fact, the recent Ofsted toolkit has not only highlighted the importance of professional learning, but it's gone further and say we want it to be focused on the development of expertise, and it has to be multifaceted and reaching all of the different areas within your school that need it. Now, historically, this has been incredibly hard to do with the myriad of different teacher career stages, teaching needs, levels of expertise, etc. So how can we anchor breadth to depth without simplifying and removing all meaning from the professional learning? And this is where we believe the technology really counts. First of all, as I've mentioned, video, the capacity to collect large amounts of video without interrupting timetables, without having people off timetable, without having to make even more space for us to physically meet afterwards necessarily. I mean, we can do it both ways, but yeah, video is a real unlocker. Video really unlocks a lot of the key interactions that we want to see. AI, as I say, can be used as a thought partner, but also as a scout to be able to identify interesting moments for us to be able to come back to and reflect on. And we want to be doing this sort of thing through some kind of regular, repeatable cycle that provides a scaffolding to that learning experience. So maybe I might be working with an instructional coach. The scaffold is going to take us through the key steps of that process and make sure we land on effective dialogue focused on concrete classroom activity. And as I say, all of this is not only in service of supporting more effective professional dialogue and reflection, but it is also made much richer through its incorporation at key stages in that framework. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to introduce some of these ideas on the platform, and I will walk you through step by step how it works. We use video and AI not to replace coaches or to give teachers all the easy answers, but to actually support people to notice things that they may not have noticed in the first instance, to have deeper and more meaningful conversations, and to reflect more effectively. Now, this process supports the skills of being able to notice more effectively, to be able to interpret in real time what's going on, and to be able to adapt on the fly. And these, of course, are the very building blocks of adaptive expertise. So let's have a look at these pathways. Pathways embody process, because we know that effective professional learning isn't really an event, it's a process. We capture those processes in terms of coaching pathways, self-reflection pathways, and teacher collaboration pathways. We've got a series of templates on the system that capture best practices in these areas, but if it doesn't map with what you do within your school or your trust, then these can be adapted as well. So let's have a look at a coaching pathway. And pathways themselves capture a series of activities that build towards a coaching cycle. So you can see there are some things that are going to happen before the coaching meeting, things that happen in the coaching meeting itself, and then the things that happen after the coaching meeting to help a new skill embed in the classroom. So first of all, the first step is for the teacher themselves to record a lesson, which they can do securely with our app. They can record in video or audio, or in fact they can also record from multiple angles as well. Once the video is in the pathway, it automatically kicks off a process of analysis that firstly produces this rich timeline of the lesson. So what this allows us to do is to review the key phases of the lesson, plus any interesting moments that happened within those phases, and actually click on the button to go and review that. Now, this gives us a really holistic view of practice and gets coach and coachee kind of on the same page, but without having to dedicate a huge amount of time to in-person observation. So this is designed really not to, as I say, give easy answers, but to give us a more rich reflective experience before we come into the coaching session itself. The next thing that the AI has done is it's identified some key moments aligned with our particular professional learning curriculum. So you can see this is giving us the opportunity to review this lesson thematically through the lens of behaviour, instruction for initial understanding, checking for understanding. And again, if these don't map directly to what you do within your trust or school, then again, these areas and what the AI is looking at can be adapted to map to your needs. When we look thematically at the lesson, we're going to do so in concert with a really rich, reflective question for us to consider regarding, in this case, instruction for initial understanding. And we can watch key lesson highlights that are aligned with this particular theme. So the idea is you watch the moment and you consider the question. And as we're doing this, something's going to resonate with us, something that we want to particularly focus on through the rest of this learning cycle. So let's say we wanted to focus on instruction for initial understanding. What this does when I select instruction for initial understanding is it adapts the different elements of this pathway to align it to create better conversations and deeper reflection around instruction for initial understanding. The first thing it's done is it's drawn into the pathway the theory guide. So this is bringing together all of the theory that relates to this particular topic and presents it in a really easy, digestible way so that the coachee can review it prior to meeting with their coach. So think of that, arriving at the coaching meeting, not only having reflected on their practice and identified something they want to focus on, but also having undertaken some pre-reading in the area. The next thing for them to do, of course, would be just to say why they've selected this area. And once that happens, this is shared with the coach such that the coach can review not just their reflection, their video, but also the reason why they've selected this particular aspect of practice. So now we're arriving into a coaching meeting in a much better place. Both people are very much more on the same page. That gives us an opportunity to review the lesson through the lens of what went well, but then also dig into that teacher's reflective statement around the challenge that they've identified. We can then refine that together using the coach's expertise to do so, but also being able to nip back and look at that timeline and identify the reflective question, reflect on that some more. All of this is in service, therefore, of selecting what we're going to do next. So the system has automatically adapted and brought in the opportunity to select action steps which are aligned with this particular area of focus. So in so doing, we can go through, select the action step that maps to the challenge, and that draws in a technique guide. The technique guide just gives us a really simple overview of what it is, what its desired effect is, and the problems it can help solve. It then gives us a video model to watch together and a recommended preparation activity that's going to support us to put this into practice more effectively. So we've just made much better use of the time we have available because we haven't needed to spend time getting on the same page. We haven't needed to have those sort of vague conversations that happen because, the lesson happened quite some time ago and is not fresh in anyone's memory. We've had a really powerful time with the support of the use of video and AI itself. So all of this is in service, therefore, of supporting the teacher to now implement with fidelity. And as they do that, as they start the process of trying this new skill in the classroom, they can continue to share their video with the coach through the pathway. And over time, as it embeds, the coach can decide to sign off the pathway at this stage and it will move to complete and we can start a new one. So, as you've seen, AI can play an enormously powerful role in being able to centre us on moments of interest, maybe break out from within our sort of siloed thinking and offer fresh perspectives. But again, always in service of that dialogue and that collaborative relationship between teacher and coach. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that, and I'm sure this is no surprise to anyone, is that like any tool, AI can be used well or it can be used badly. And actually one of the things that's coming through very evidently now is that when we use generative AI badly in the space of education, it can actually harm learning. Why? Because effectively we're outsourcing the thinking, we're outsourcing the tough thinking that actually underpins learning. And so in this case, the question is, how do we balance that efficiency that AI offers with not outsourcing the thinking, with getting it to actually offer those fresh perspectives and break us out of our silos? And one of the things I'd just like to really frame up here is this is a example of some of the feedback or reflective questions that the system can generate. And as you can see here, it's structured in a particular way. The way that the AI is responding is highlighting something that it's noticed and wondering about the consequence, and then moving on to something else that it's noticed, asked you about what you think the consequences of that may be, whether you'd like to explore that further, and then offering to connect you into other professional learning opportunities. It's not saying, I saw this, you should do that. That would be a bad way to go, because we'd be outsourcing the thinking in that context. So everything we do at Iris now, with video, with AI, with the pathways of learning, and with the content that we can either work with you to curate for your own school and your own context, or you can work from our bank of content as well, is to stimulate thinking and metacognition in teachers. That's number one design criteria, to build habits centered around inquiry, analysis, experimentation, and dialogue. And most importantly of all, to enhance, not replace, professional expertise. Thank you.